is I'm going to compress. One of the things our monthly meeting is about fellowship. And quite frankly, that's a key component of it, and it may be the most important thing we do, and we want you to know that, okay? To just enjoy each other's company. So what our policy is we let you get as much time as you need and as they need, and then whoever the speaker is, it's his job or her job to know the material well enough that they can compress. We'll see if you can be the judges whether I can compress or not. Preachers are not very well known for that. Okay, now what I'm going to ask you to do, let me get you to focus. I need to tell you about a physical weakness I have. I have a hearing deficit. I have no more than 50% hearing in my left ear. I only have about 2/3 in my right. And what that difference does is when I'm presenting and everybody starts to talk, I have no idea where it's coming from, and it thoroughly confuses me. So I want to ask you, if you have a question, raise your hand and I'll call on you. But don't discuss it with the person next to you, because what will happen is I'll hear that, my brain will try to figure it out. I'm an ADD kid that grew up. When I did my PhD program, I stood in the back of the class, and I refused to pay the tuition unless I was allowed to stand in the classroom to learn, because that's how I learned. And I wasn't willing to pay for anything that wasn't going to benefit me. So you say that's insanity. Guilty as charged. Red Bank, New Jersey, right south of Camden, Gloucester County. A battle occurred there, a series of battles, and in those series of battles in October 1771, there were 3 skirmishes and 2 battles. One involved 1777, I'm sorry, involved Fort Mercer, Red Bank. It involved Fort Mifflin, Mud Fort, and it involved the Pennsylvania Navy. Fort Billingsport, the battle occurred in October. You can see the dates. Fort Mercer and the Pennsylvania Navy, you can see how the dates progress. Fort Mifflin, which is now part of Philadelphia Airport, and November 15th. The final battle at Fort Mercer, which was more or less a skirmish and a retreat, not a retreat, but a calculated move back, at the end of November. And then there was a final attack under Lafayette at Timber Creek, right outside of Gloucester, on November 25th. And it was at that skirmish that we lost one of the people from Atlantic County, I'm going to call it Atlantic County, killed in action, and we had one person who was severely wounded that was disabled for the rest of their life. And we'll hear in their words, well, not the one's words around here, but in the other's words, what happened to them. General background, 1775, Congress begins the Delaware River obstructions to stop the British shipping from coming up and taking the largest city in America. 1776, first thing Congress does after it declares independence is buy land at Billingsport to build a fort to protect the river. And the Americans, actually from here, start to go up and build Fort Mercer on the New Jersey side and Fort Mifflin on an island in the middle of the channel. Colonel Somers' men were involved in building the New Jersey side. August 25th, you know the British land. They land at Head of Elk, Maryland, and they come up, and we have the battles of Brandywine, etc., which the British win. Incidentally, just this week I found that one of our soldiers pulled out of the militia, signed up for full-time duty, went away for a year and a half, and actually fought in the Battle of Brandywine. And we'll hear his words. Cornwallis occupies Philadelphia on my birthday in 1777. That was a good birthday present, I suppose. And then on October 22nd, the first Battle of Red Bank occurs. Now the specific background, here's what our guys were doing. Now here's where I want you to get the picture. Atlantic County residents. They're farmers and fishermen. They sign up, almost all of them as far as we can now tell, and they sign up for a month on, a month off, a month on, a month off. They are special reserves, if you will. But they did what they were called to do. In 1777, they went to Trenton for follow-up work after Washington kind of tore up the British. In February, our guys were at the Raritan River in Morristown fighting. They were in Burlington, at the Forks on the Mullica, and at Foxboroughs, which is today's Chestnut Neck, on guard duty. In March, they were on guard duty at Cooper's Ferry and Foxboroughs, probably April too. In May, they were doing the same thing. In June they were. In July. In August, they're still up there on guard duty. Who was guarding the Delaware on the Jersey side? The guys from Atlantic County, for the most part. In September, at Haddonfield, they heard the Battle of Brandywine while they were on guard at Red Bank, Haddonfield, etc. Enoch Gandy from Atlantic County was in the Battle of Brandywine. And at Red Bank, they were also, and at Somers Point, on guard duty. And while Brandywine was going on up there, they were skirmishing with refugees or Tories here. October,
Where?
right here along the coast. Somers Point, Atlantic City Inlet, and the further up inlet which goes into Great Bay. Now, Haddonfield, they were back on guard duty after the battles. They were back at Cooper's Ferry on guard duty and skirmishing with the British in Philadelphia there. That's 1777. So the idea that the men from Atlantic County weren't doing anything is fiction. The battle preparation, battle proper. George Washington realizes that he has a chance of starving the British out of Philadelphia and making them run. And he takes his best shot. It turned out not to be good enough, but they ended up having to leave Philadelphia anyway. They didn't really win, even though they occupied. He writes to Commander Hazelwood, the head of the Pennsylvania Navy, I think it of the greatest importance that we can stop the enemy's fleet from coming up and prevent them from getting possession of the mud fort. Now that's not the mud fort at Chestnut Neck, that's the mud fort we call Fort Mifflin, that's part of Philadelphia Airport today. And to Colonel Samuel Smith, you take the safest and most expeditious method of conducting the detachment, the 4th Maryland Regiment, that was his detachment, to Fort Mifflin. The keeping of the fort is of very great importance. To Elbridge Gerry, a leader in Massachusetts, we are now in motion and advancing to form a junction with General McDougall. I expect to be joined in a day or two by General Foreman with 1,400, I should say 1,400 to 1,500 New Jersey militia. Washington was aware of the New Jersey militia, and he was aware that they were active. And out of all the militias in South Jersey, the Gloucester County was the active militia, and the 3rd County Battalion, ours, was always there. Maryland? Here's the fellow from Brandywine. I just thought you'd like to see this. When they left their winter quarters in September, he believes they marched to Woodbury again. They're coming down from North Jersey. They were marched from Woodbury down Jersey and crossed to Delaware Bay at a ferry above Wilmington, opposite to the Schuylkill in the state of Delaware. And they were marched from there to within a short distance of the ground where the Battle of Brandywine was fought, and there they encamped. They had not been there long before the British Army arrived and attempted to cross the Brandywine, and at which time they had a very warm engagement. That means they had a good firefight. Remember, they didn't use the big words like we do today. It was a very warm engagement. A good skirmish. We gave them problems. They always understated for some reason. The regiment to which he belonged left the area and marched through Westchester to the best of his recollection to a place called Chestnut Hill. Very accurate recollection. In Philadelphia County in the state of Pennsylvania, at which place a large army was encamped, the Americans. The British Army were in Philadelphia and sallied out and were met at Germantown near to the encampment by the American Army and had a very warm engagement. He likes that phrase. Not long after the Battle of Germantown, I put Enoch Gandy here so we remember who we're talking about, believes that they were marched to a ferry below Bristol. They were. On the Delaware and crossed the river Delaware into the state of New Jersey again to go into winter quarters. But before they had reached winter quarters, they were ordered to Red Bank, at which they had a warm engagement with the Hessians. After the battle, they went into winter quarters to the best of his recollection at Egg Harbor. The regular troops were brought into Red Bank, and so were the militia to do the battle. Most of the regular troops didn't get there. Maryland?
Norm, the reference to Egg Harbor, what would that be today?
That would be Atlantic County. All of Atlantic County was originally Egg Harbor Township. Little by little, starting with Galloway Township in 1774, I believe it is.
1774.
Okay, gets carved out. And after that, the rest of them get carved out, one by one. But at this time of the Revolution, Egg Harbor was Egg Harbor. And even when they referred to Galloway, nobody other than people in Galloway knew there was a Galloway yet. So it was still Egg Harbor.
But the actual specific location would have been Somers Point, Mays Landing, you know, what we now call those towns.
They were, Mays Landing was here, Somers Point was here, Absecon was here, Chestnut Neck was here, Port Republic was here, and probably somewhere up like where, I forget the name of it, where Route 40 goes across out that way. There was a place up there. I just don't remember the name. Pardon me?
Weymouth?
That's it, Weymouth, okay? So that was there. But they were there. Other than that, you had just farmers in between. Maryland? Yeah, here are the responses. Colonel Smith gets to Fort Mifflin, the mud fort, in the river. He says, I find everything in the utmost condition. 60 untrained militia. They were Pennsylvania from Chester County militia. General Newcomb is now at Woodbury with 500 militia. These are Gloucester County militia. These are our guys. Our guys are from here are probably a couple hundred of these. From Colonel Smith, again, the enemies have landed near Billingsport, which place they now have possession of. Our militia, Pennsylvania, evacuated it. The enemy has not yet taken possession of Red Bank. From Louis Nicola in Trenton. Now, by the way, this is one of Washington's lead guys to talk about arms procurement. And he is originally from Connecticut. He says, Colonel Somers of the militia, dispatched by General Newcomb in quest of arms and ammunition for the militia who assemble at Red Bank very fast, has just been with me to inquire where he can be supplied. I recommended to the colonel that he go by the way of Princeton as the governor and the council are assembled there. As it turns out, Colonel Somers had to go all the way to Easton to get ammunition for his troops to fight this battle. And they were probably held back from the battle for an extra day because they didn't have it, it seems. Now, these are the letters of George Washington. So our troops and our commander were very well known to George Washington as a guy who did what he was called to do in this area. Maryland? Now, I want to talk to you about Billingsport. Take your maps in front of you and take a look at the big map. That's this map here. Now, I'm going to see if it'll work this way. It will. Okay. Here, first of all, here's Philadelphia up here. Let's start from the top. Camden and Cooper's Ferry are there. We come down, we see Gloucester. And down here further, we see Fort Mercer. Right out here on this island, which is now part of Philadelphia Airport, this is Fort Mifflin. Now, this is a fort built on a tidal flat. It's just a piece of mud that was out in the middle of the channel. Down here is Fort Billingsport. Now, if you go to Billingsport, you will see little lines coming off. They are called chevaux de frise. That means iron horses in French. And here's what they were. They were boxes, 40 feet by 50 feet square, and probably about 12 feet deep, filled with rocks, submerged in the middle of the channel, with 12-inch in diameter, actually 12 by 12, they weren't round, they were square for extra strength. And on top of them was this cast iron thing. There's 12 to 13 inches between these two steel bars. And they were placed to where they were that far under the water at low tide. And so you only have about a 5 to 6 foot tidal change in the Delaware at that point. The ships draw 15 to 18 feet of water. They go up at any tide. Wooden ship, it just rakes the bottom out of a British ship. And they put them in lines across the river here, and then they put them in lines over here across the channel. So the British had a choice: run aground or stop to try to remove these things with 3 or 4 ships for a few hours. And while they're trying to remove them, guess what the American forces over New Jersey are doing with their little bang-bangs? They're putting cannonballs through those ships. And Howe was petrified of what the British were going to do. So what he did is he sent his troops from Philadelphia down here, crossed them over right into this creek right here, came down and overwhelmed the few people at Billingsport and got the first one. John Ingersoll from Atlantic County said in 1832, he said, I was out reconnoitering in the neighborhood of Raccoon Creek, that's down near Billingsport. The enemy crossed said creek and attacked us. We retreated back to Willingboro. The British came across with a couple thousand troops, and there were only about 150 U.S. troops in the fort, and so they followed Washington's policy of withdraw back and choose the best day to fight. Washington did not believe what the North Koreans believed in the Second World War, and that in the Korean War, and that is you throw people against guns and just let them be slaughtered for nothing. Washington didn't do that. Washington believed that a retreat was a smart man's way of fighting a battle another day that he could win, rather than standing up and fighting a battle that he knew he couldn't win. And here's what happened, real quickly. And the British came across on the ferry, went up to the fort, and General Newcomb came down with 400 to 500 troops, found 1,500 British all lined up coming up the road at him, sniped at them for a while, slowed them down, went back up to fight another day. The British took over the fort. Before they did it, the Americans, of course, spiked the cannons, blew them up. Yes, sir?
They were actually British, not Hessians.
At this particular point that they're British, as far as we can see. Yeah, there could be Hessians amongst them. You don't get that information at Billingsport. You do get that information at Red Bank. By the way, go back one, Marilyn, use the other arrow. This is a picture of John Hazelwood, the commander of the Pennsylvania Navy. I just think that's a strange statement, the Pennsylvania Navy, but there was one. Okay, Fort Mercer. Now, you now have the bottom fort is taken at Billingsport. General Howe's next thing is to come up here and take Fort Mercer and Mifflin, because between these two they can destroy all British shipping coming up. They can just beat them to death. Howe has to take them or starve. General Brigadier General Barnum, the general from Connecticut, says, from what Washington says to him, he says, "I desire you will immediately detach Colonel Green and Colonel Angel's regiments with orders to throw themselves into the fort at Red Bank." He writes a separate letter to Colonel Christopher Green. You should not, by the way, this is, remember General Green of the Green Mountain Boys up north, and Nathaniel Green, this is his cousin. "You should not lose a moment's time in getting to the place of your destination and making every proper preparation for its defense. I've written to General Newcomb of the Jersey Militia to give you all the aid in his power. The whole defense of the Delaware depends upon it." Here's what's going to happen. The British are going to come across from Cooper's Ferry. Remember, there is no Camden. It's just a ferry. They're going to come out to Haddonfield. They're going to find out they can't come down here because there's militia up here sniping. They're going to come all the way out. Now, these are Hessians at this point. Do you remember from the last presentation, our buddy Colonel Von Donop that had the little tete-a-tete in Mount Holly with that lady, and that lady kept his attention? Well, he was made a fool out of by his own people and by the British. And so now, it's not even a year later, he is going to redeem himself. And he says to General Howe, "Let my troops do it. We'll go over there and we'll whip them, or I'll be in hell by the evening." Well, depending on your theology, he may have made it. So they come down here. Now, the Americans know they're coming. They're not dumb.
Norm, we can't see your pointer.
Well, my pointer's probably, the battery's probably dying. Okay, so I'll have to use my finger.
Okay.
So they go out here. They can't come down here because they find out that the creek down here has been the bridges have been broken up. So they go out. They come down and try it anyway. They flip around and go out the long way through Clements Bridge today, and they come up on Fort Mercer, and they attack. Now, here's what I want to show you about the fort, and here's where I want to get my little piece of paper out, and I want you to switch over to your other map. By the way, here is here's the Red Bank Fort Mercer flag, and here's the flag flying on Mud Fort Mifflin in the middle of the Delaware.
Where did you get those?
I got those from a flag specialty company. Okay, they are all sorts of things available. My next project is to see which most likely were our troops using. Don't have the answer to that yet. I want to show you this fort. Take a look at your map and find number 1. Number 1 should be right here. Here's what the fort looks like. There's a 10 to 12 foot wall all the way around it. There is about a 12-foot ditch dug on the outside of that wall. And in that ditch, on the edge of that ditch, are big branches that are stuck in that are sharpened on the end. So that means when you get across the ditch, if you do, before you can try to go up this wall, which is straight, you have to get stuck quite a bit. On the outside, they cut down hundreds of trees and made an abatis. That's a wall all the way around it. That would be number 3. The ditch is number 2 on your sheet, and the abatis is number 3, and this is trees all gnarled together, tied together with their branches sharpened. Now, there's 2 parts to the fort. Green realized that he couldn't defend this fort. So what he did is he took the original side of the fort and decided to defend that. At number 5, he digs another 12-foot ditch right in here. At number 4, he puts an abatis in here. He's got the Philadelphia Navy out here in row galleys with cannons. Up come the British. There's about 1,500 to 1,800 British, depending on the, Hessians with some British. They come up and they line up their 3 regiments. They put their sharpshooters called the Jaggers behind them, and they stick their artillery over here. Ring refuses to surrender. They get ready to move. As they get ready to move and start firing their cannons for a short, brief time, and the Jaggers start trying to shoot the Americans off the walls. Now remember, the Americans are out here on the walls too. It's a real setup. So Von Donop thinks this whole thing is filled with hundreds, maybe 1,000 or 2 people. The row galleys, under our fellow Hazelwood, they don't try to shoot these guys. They start scattering these fellas here, the sharpshooters. And they start blowing up the Hessian artillery. They had a couple mortars and about 7 or 8 3-pound cannons. At that point, Von Donop is brave. He says, let's go get them, guys. These guys attack here. They fight their way through here. The Americans shoot at them a little bit. They want them to come further. This group and this group both fight their way into here. As they're just about to get in, the Americans come running back here, can jump in here, pull the last ladder up in their back. The Hessians all get in here, and what they find they are in is a big rectangle with 10 to 12 foot walls around it, no real way out, and another abatis here. As they cross the abatis to try to get up, they find they fall into a 10 to 12 foot ditch. At this point and this point only, the Americans open up with their cannons, with their guns, and it's just a slaughter. And so they win the day. Jeremiah Leeds of Atlantic County says the Battle of Red Bank was fought the afternoon before we arrived. John Giberson says, I heard the firing. They're held back. They still don't have ammunition yet. And Levi Price says he next entered as a fifer in the company. By the way, he comes the next day. Commanded by Captain Joseph Conover and Colonel Somers' regiment. The company marched from Egg Harbor to the fort at Red Bank on the Delaware. He arrived at the fort after the battle. He heard the firing in the battle when it... I don't remember, I made a mistake there. When they were landing probably on their march up. He helped bury those who were killed in the battle. 127 Hessians were buried. By our guys. They ended up doing burial duty. He remained at the fort 1 month. Hessian losses, 151 killed, 263 wounded, 80 desertions that became part of the community in New Jersey. 20 were taken prisoner. American losses, only 14 killed or 23 wounded. This is the Battle of Red Bank, and the Americans won. I'm going to have to start moving more quickly. All of our guys were not there. Now here's what you have to understand. Let's supposing half or 2/3 of our regiment gets called up. They don't all go to one spot. You take a captain, send him with 50 guys there, take another captain, send him with 50 guys there, and you send most of them up under a few captains to another place. And the captain chooses, or the people choose, who they're going to go with. So a private might serve with one captain 1 month, another one the next. That's why it's so hard to track. Stephen Ford, an ancestor of Earl Kane, wasn't at Red Bank. He said he enlisted as a musket man under Captain John Hamilton, who commanded the ship Mifflin belonging to the state of Pennsylvania. The Mifflin sailed to Jamaica and made many prizes. This declarant, Stephen Ford, remained in the service as a Marine on board the said ship, comprising a period of 2 years, 6 months. John Steelman, one of the infamous Steelman clan, he then volunteered under Captain James Somers and served under him for 3 months. During this term of service, they took a schooner from the refugees, these are the Tories, the Loyalists, on its way to New York. It was loaded with flour and had on her 2 Negroes, which they also took. And presumably freed as few held slaves in our area. Yeah, Maryland. So now, we have Billingsport. How are we doing? We got to really move because I want to respect your time. We have Red Bank 1, we have Fort Mifflin. The battle is against an island. The British beat the blockade a little bit. They put cannons all along what's now Philadelphia Airport and the Philadelphia Navy Yard, and for a week or so they batter this fort to where it's just mud walls. The British start firing. They increase it. The commander's out. He has to be brought in. Colonel Green and 150 guys now come over. The Red Bank land battle occurs. American victory. While we're winning in Red Bank, we're getting our tails torn up in Fort Mifflin, just a quarter of a mile away. All-out British fire to the fort from land and water destroys the fort. The Americans evacuate the fort, and the British occupy a fort, I should have put a useless fort, later to return to Philadelphia under the militia harassment fire. So Fort Mifflin falls to the British. At this point, they own the river. The final skirmishes, they finally decided we're going to get that Red Bank. So instead of coming with 1,500 Hessians, they bring 4,000 troops at Billingsport and another 1,000 at Cooper's Ferry, one from the bottom, one from the top. British land 3,000 more under Cornwallis for a total of 8,000 men to face now 3,000 Americans. Lafayette is on his way. A couple New Jersey generals are there. They cannot win. And so the Americans under Lafayette destroy Fort Mercer and they retreat back to safety up into lower Burlington County today. Colonel Ellis, Hillman, and Somers lead the combined Gloucester County battalions as a team. By the way, you always see their names together. They work as a team. The militia, so now we're done with Red Bank. Red Bank is blown up. The British have it. The British hang out in Camden County. I'm going to call it by today's name. Because they want to make sure, see if they can get some food and everything. Well, our guys, then their job changes. Now their job changes from protecting Fort Mercer to harassing the British food foraging parties. And militia under Lafayette harassed the British withdrawal, and at this point, our Lieutenant John Lucas is killed in action, and Ensign John Tilton and Hugh Jones are wounded in action at Timber Creek. We don't know when in December, but Colonel Somers goes home sick. In the winter and spring of 1778, the Gloucester County Militia is still up there, another group of guys working on the British. Summer of 1778, the Pennsylvania militia are tearing them up in the west. The Gloucester County militia is tearing them up in the east. Hal says, I've had enough, and he takes his troops back to New York, and that's where we get the Battle of Monmouth. And our guys were there too. Maryland? Okay. Colonel Joseph Ellis is Somers' partner. He's the commander of the 1st Gloucester Battalion. And he writes a letter to Colonel General Nathaniel Greene, and he says, in compliance with your letter yesterday, I send you a state of the militia under my command, which is about 400 effectives at this place, and about 100 in the neighborhood of Manto Creek. And it goes on to say that the British are now there with 5,000 people, British, Hessians, and Marines, and their job is to hit them, hit them, hit them, hit them. Maryland? Well, we can see that later. General Lafayette writes in his diary that he only had with him, at this point, about 350 men facing about 400 Hessians at Timber Creek. Mostly Gloucester County men, and about half of these were from Atlantic County, is what we can see. And he attacks suddenly, the enemy gives way. Cornwallis came up with the Grenadiers, but believing he was engaging Greene's entire force in the wood, he let himself get pushed back to the outskirts of Gloucester with a loss of about 60 men. Greene arrived during the night but chose not to attack, and Lord Cornwallis crossed the river back to Philadelphia. This is where our guys were killed and wounded, right here in this final battle. 400 of them, or 350 of them, backed Cornwallis' entire army up for a day until Greene could get down and add to the thing, and Cornwallis said, no thank you. So were our guys involved? I think they were. Maryland? Casualties, I want you to hear this. Remember I told you some people were killed? Robert Leeds, the lieutenant, writes, the company to which our deponent belonged was a creek called Little Timber Creek and exchanged shots with the British on the other side. The next day they had another skirmish with the British near the same place, and this Lucas was killed by a ball which struck him in the breast below the left nipple and went through his body. Ensign John Tilton was shot in the left shoulder. Patrick McCollum says a man named Hugh Jones was also wounded. We did not know that Lieutenant Lucas has been killed until we got back to Haddonfield. And the next day, James Murphy and myself went to the battleground and brought him, Lucas, to our quarters. He had been thrown into a ditch and covered with some rubbish and was pretty much stripped of his clothes. McCollum says that when they went down, they also took 4 prisoners. David Somers writes, John Tilton says, I received a severe wound and was taken home and placed under the care of physicians for 6 months. I am disabled to this day. Maryland? here is who served at these battles. Well, obviously, the commander was General Philemon Dixon. Colonel Somers worked with Colonel Joseph Ellis, later a brigadier general, and Colonel Josiah Hillman. The lieutenant colonel was Colonel Elijah Clark. That is who the Clark Fort, Fort Clark, that possibly was in Atlantic City, that we now know from a press article, was there.
Where was that?
First, pardon me?
Where was the
On
fort?
Clam Creek. I was just given an article from the press the other night at the presentation that they had researched. The house was torn down and the plaque was thrown away when the house was torn down. So we're going to get some people to go back in the press and see if we can do it. And I think the DAR folks might be interested in that because there was a battle there and a British ship was sunk. Now here are the company officers. I won't read them all to you. Some of them, George Payne went home sick after the first Red Bank. Lieutenant Lucas took over the company and was killed. John Tilton was wounded. Captain Christopher Rapay got sick possibly before Red Bank and went home. These are the other people. These are the privates that we know were at Red Bank from this area. Hugh Jones was wounded. Now you say, Norm, there were a couple hundred more. Yes, but remember the pensions weren't filled out until 1832, and most of them were all dead and gone by that time. So unless somebody digs up a diary or a journal, that's about all we can know. And
That's
so,
what I want
go
to
ahead.
ask you then. There are a number of times where you quote different people, not in these pension applications, which are understandable, but you have these other quotes from the, where do you get those?
Okay, let me give you a brief bibliography. Yeah. In
Yes,
Stockton Library, partially, and in Princeton University Library is every letter that exists that was written to and from Washington. We have letters to and from Lafayette. We have General Greene. We have letters from, he was in this area. We have all sorts of other letters back and forth. The problem is that you're not going to find them online and you're not going to find them in a local library. You're going to have to go to a major depository like a Princeton Library. And as I said the other night, they're there, but it's an expensive luxury to get them there. And so that's how you find
Mostly
them.
letters.
Pardon me?
Letters.
Well, they're published in journals. I mean, the Washington collection is, I don't know, it's got to be 70 or 80 books, that thick. And the books are $125 a piece if you want to buy them. So you got a big bill. So that's the people that attended Richard Somers, always in the War for Independence. Our local 3rd Gloucester Battalion, men under Colonel Richard Somers, answered the call to duty, no matter what the cost. So you now have the story of your ancestors, the people who lived here before you, and the battles on the Delaware.
Where's that picture from?
That is the battlefield park at Red Bank, New Jersey. Yeah, there is a battlefield tank at Fort Mifflin behind the airport. And I believe that this story is expandable. I believe there's more to tell in this story yet, just haven't found it. Yeah, so is there any questions before we, yes ma'am?